The restaurant was small, warm, and filled with the quiet sounds of cutlery and soft laughter. Yet when the billionaire stepped inside, the air seemed to shift, as if the place itself recognized someone important had entered. But he walked in with no bodyguards, no reporters chasing him, no photographers flashing their cameras. He came in alone, like an ordinary man looking for a peaceful meal. His tailored suit was simple yet elegant, his shoes polished but not flashy, and though his face was familiar from magazines and news articles, most people could hardly believe a man of his status would choose a modest place like this for dinner. He moved slowly through the restaurant, not rushing, not trying to draw attention, and his eyes scanned the room, not searching for luxury, but for a corner that promised peace, away from stares, away from questions, away from the noise of the world he usually lived in. He finally found a quiet table near the window, where the glow of the evening streetlights slipped through the glass and landed softly on his tablecloth, and above the table hung a portrait, a large painting of a beautiful woman, whose calm smile seemed to watch over the diners below. The waitress, a young woman with a neat apron and tired eyes, walked over with a polite smile. Though her heart raced as she realized who she was serving, she tried to keep her voice steady as she asked for his order, and he responded with surprising gentleness, his voice low and kind. Unlike the sharp tone people expected from men of power, he asked for a simple meal, something ordinary, nothing grand, no bottles of wine worth thousands of dollars, no exotic dishes, just plain food, cooked with care, the kind of food that spoke more of home than of wealth. The other diners whispered among themselves, trying not to stare but failing, wondering why the billionaire was here, why he wasn't at some five-star hotel or an exclusive dining club. But he paid no attention. He opened the menu with calm hands, and after placing his order, he sat back, his eyes wandering to the portrait above him. The woman in the painting had kind eyes, eyes full of warmth, and though her face was captured in strokes of paint, it seemed almost alive, as if she had something to say. For the billionaire, this meal was not just about eating, it was about escaping the endless boardroom meetings, the constant demands of his empire, the business calls that never stopped. He was a man admired for his wealth and feared for his influence. Yet beneath all that power was a heart that had grown tired of being watched, tired of being judged, tired of pretending to be untouchable. Tonight he wanted to be human again, just a man having dinner in peace. The waitress returned with water, setting the glass gently on the table, her eyes darting once more to the portrait above. She couldn't explain why it caught her attention. But there was something about it, something unusual. Still she said nothing, and the billionaire, noticing her hesitation, gave her a soft smile. A smile that carried both sadness and kindness, the kind of smile only someone who had loved and lost could give. As he waited for his food, he leaned back and let the gentle hum of the restaurant surround him. Children's laughter from a nearby table, the sound of forks clinking against plates, the faint music playing from an old speaker, all of it was simple, ordinary. But for him it was priceless, far more valuable than the countless luxury dinners he had attended in golden halls. Here, no one was asking for his opinion on a deal. No one was calculating his net worth. Here, he was just another customer, waiting for a meal. But the portrait kept pulling his eyes back, again and again. The woman's painted face reminded him of someone he once held close, someone who shaped his world and softened his heart. His wife, his late wife, the woman who had been his anchor when the storms of wealth and power threatened to drown him. She had been gone for years, yet her memory lived in every corner of his heart, and seeing that portrait above him felt like fate, like the universe placing him at this exact table for a reason. The billionaire's thoughts wandered to the necklace painted on the woman in the portrait, a necklace that sparkled faintly even in the dim light, its delicate design capturing the attention of anyone who looked closely. He felt a strange pull towards it, as if the necklace itself carried a story, but he brushed the thought aside, sipping his water and forcing himself to focus on the present moment. The waitress, who had noticed his gaze drifting to the portrait, said nothing yet, though curiosity stirred within her. Minutes passed, the food arrived, steam rising gently from the plate, and the billionaire picked up his fork, eating slowly, savoring every bite as though it were more than just food, as though it were medicine for his weary soul. Each taste reminded him of simpler times, of meals shared with his wife in quiet kitchens, of laughter around tables not decorated with gold but with love. He chewed carefully, letting the flavors settle, and the waitress, standing a short distance away, observed. quietly, noticing the calm but heavy expression on his face. The world outside that little restaurant might have seen him as a titan, a man made of steel and money, but inside those walls, under the warm glow of the portrait, he was simply a man in mourning, a man seeking silence, a man trying to feel alive again, and though no one else knew it yet, this ordinary dinner would soon turn into something unforgettable. Something that would change not only his life but also the life of the young waitress who had noticed far more than she was supposed to. The restaurant carried on with its quiet rhythm, people eating, talking, laughing softly, yet at one table near the window something different was unfolding. The young waitress kept glancing toward the portrait above the billionaire's head. Her hands moved with the usual routine of serving water, collecting plates, and writing down orders, but her mind was not calm. Her thoughts circled around the painted woman on the wall, the way the artist had captured her soft smile, the way her eyes seemed almost alive, and most of all, the necklace that rested against her neck in the painting. The waitress had seen portraits before, many of them hung in homes, hotels, and even restaurants. But this one was unusual. It pulled her in. It stirred something deep inside her that she could not easily ignore. Her eyes lingered longer than they should have, and every time she walked past the billionaire's table, her gaze drifted upward toward the necklace, the thin golden chain, the delicate pendant in the middle, sparkling faintly as if even the paint itself refused to dull its shine. The sight made her heartbeat quicken, for it was not just jewelry to her eyes, it was memory. The billionaire noticed her pause, though he said nothing. His own eyes had already been drawn many times to the painting, but seeing the waitress stop, even if only for a second, reminded him that he was not alone in feeling the strange presence of the portrait. He took a sip of his drink, quietly studying the way she looked at it. Her face was a mixture of wonder and something else, something almost like recognition, and that thought unsettled him more than he expected. The young woman continued serving other tables, but the picture of the necklace stayed in her mind. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her when she was little. Stories of a necklace that once belonged to their family. A necklace so unique and beautiful that people spoke of it as if it carried magic. Her grandmother would describe it in detail, the curve of the chain, the shimmer of the stone, the way it looked when sunlight touched it, and though the necklace was lost long before the waitress was born, the description had been told so many times that she carried it in her imagination like a memory of her own. Now, standing only a few feet away from the portrait, she felt that imagination collide with reality. The painted necklace looked exactly as her grandmother had described it. Every detail matched. It was not just similar, it was identical. The waitress felt her breath catch in her throat. Her hand tightened slightly on the notepad she carried. She dared to look again. Her eyes scanning the pendant carefully, her grandmother's words echoed in her ears, and her chest grew heavy. Was it possible that the very necklace her family had mourned for decades now hung around the neck of a woman in a portrait above a billionaire's dinner table? The room around her seemed to fade for a moment, the chatter of customers, the clinking of plates, the shuffle of feet on the wooden floor, all of it dulled as her mind focused only on that necklace. Her curiosity grew stronger, mixed with disbelief and a sense of fear. She wondered if she was imagining it, if her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. She even blinked several times. But no, the necklace was real, painted clearly, every detail shining back at her like truth. She hesitated to say anything. After all, how could a simple waitress in a small restaurant question a billionaire about something so delicate? She thought of walking away, keeping the discovery locked inside her. But her heart refused to let it go. She knew she had to ask, even if her voice shook, even if she sounded foolish, because the necklace was not just an object, it was a piece of her family's history. It was the last connection to a story that had been told for generations and never resolved. The billionaire, though silent, began to sense her unease. He noticed how her steps slowed near his table, how her eyes avoided his yet always drifted upward to the painting. He felt a strange tension in the air, a feeling that the portrait was no longer just a piece of decoration on the wall but a bridge to something larger, something hidden, something waiting to surface. His fork rested on the plate as he studied her carefully, his own heart quietly stirring with memories he usually buried. The waitress finally approached his table with a fresh jug of water, her hands trembling slightly as she poured into his glass. She dared to speak, her voice soft, almost uncertain. She asked about the portrait, about the woman in it, pretending at first to be curious about the art itself. But her real question sat heavy in her chest. The necklace. She wanted to know about the necklace, yet the words froze on her lips. Fear of crossing a line kept her silent, so she smiled politely and walked away, though inside she burned with unanswered questions. Back near the counter, she whispered to herself, rehearsing the courage she would need to ask again. The portrait pulled her eyes back once more, her heart pounding harder. The memory of her grandmother's trembling voice telling the story of the lost necklace came rushing back. And she knew this was not coincidence. There was a reason the necklace appeared here, in this place, above this man's table. Fate had placed her in front of it, and though she did not yet understand how, she could feel that the moment carried weight. The billionaire too lifted his gaze to the portrait, his eyes meeting the painted necklace with a heaviness that was almost painful. He thought of his wife, of the day he first saw the necklace on her, of the questions he never asked about its origin. He felt the waitress's lingering stare even though she had walked away, and deep inside, a storm began to build, a storm of guilt, of curiosity, of truth long avoided, both of them. The billionaire and the waitress, now bound by a single necklace. A single secret that neither could ignore much longer. The restaurant was still busy with the soft noise of people enjoying their meals. Yet for the young waitress, everything seemed to fade except for one detail, the necklace in the portrait. She could not take her eyes off it. She felt as if her grandmother's voice was whispering in her ear, telling her the same old story of the necklace that had been in her family for generations. A necklace that was stolen or lost in a way no one ever truly understood. A necklace her grandmother always spoke of with both love and sadness. Now that very same design, every curve, every detail, every shimmer of gold and stone, was staring back at her from the painted neck of the woman in the portrait above the billionaire's table. Her heart pounded in her chest, her palms grew sweaty, and she tried to steady her breathing as she walked back toward the billionaire's table. She told herself she was being foolish. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe her mind wanted so badly to connect the painting to her grandmother's stories that it was creating an illusion. But when she came close and dared to really look again, there was no doubt, it was exactly the same, the thin golden chain, the pendant shaped like a teardrop, the tiny carved details around the stone. Even the way the artist painted its soft glow seemed too real to dismiss. She held her notepad tightly, unsure if she should say anything. After all, he was a billionaire, a man of power and influence, and she was just a waitress serving tables. But the words burned inside her. If she stayed quiet, she would regret it forever. So with a nervous breath, she gathered courage and spoke, her voice trembling at first. She said softly that the necklace in the painting looked very familiar to her, too familiar to be a mistake. The billionaire, who had been slowly eating, stopped for a moment, his fork resting on the plate. His eyes moved from her face to the portrait, then back to her. He didn't speak right away, as though her observation had pulled him into memories he had long tried to bury. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, he gave her a slow nod, a signal that she could continue if she wished. Encouraged by his silence, the waitress began to explain. She told him about her grandmother, about the way she used to describe the necklace when telling bedtime stories, not just as jewelry but as a symbol of their family's history. She spoke about how the necklace disappeared many years ago, how the loss had broken her grandmother's heart, how she often said it was the last memory of love and sacrifice passed down from her ancestors. Her voice shook as she spoke, not because of fear of the billionaire, but because the emotions in her heart were too strong to hide. The billionaire listened intently, his eyes fixed on her. Though his hands trembled slightly as he lowered his fork, each word she spoke cut through him like a blade, because deep inside, he already knew there was something unusual about the necklace. He had always wondered where it truly came from. He had bought it long ago from a private collector, no questions asked. Because his wife had admired it so much, he never searched for its story. He simply paid the price and gave it to her as a gift she cherished until her last breath. As the waitress spoke, her eyes flickered upward again, staring at the painted necklace as if it were alive. She said quietly that the necklace in the portrait was not just similar. It was the same one. Her voice cracked as she whispered the words, and she admitted that she felt as though her grandmother was standing beside her. Confirming it with a nod, the restaurant around them seemed to disappear. The two of them standing in a bubble of truth that was too heavy to ignore. For a long moment, the billionaire said nothing. His chest rose and fell slowly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. His mind went back to the first time his wife had worn that necklace. The joy in her eyes, the way she touched it gently as if it held her heart. He thought of how proud he had felt to give it to her. Yet now, hearing the waitress's story, he realized that what brought his wife happiness might have been built on someone else's loss, someone else's pain. Guilt settled into his soul like a heavy stone. The waitress, noticing the sudden silence, felt her knees weaken. She wondered if she had gone too far, if she had offended him. But before she could apologize, she saw the billionaire lower his head, his hand covering his eyes, his shoulders trembling slightly. She froze, realizing that she had touched something deep, something raw inside him, something far beyond a simple story of a lost necklace. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, broken even. He admitted that he had never known the true history of the necklace, that he had bought it for his wife many years ago without asking questions. He confessed that he always felt a strange weight attached to it, as if it carried a story untold. But his wife loved it too much for him to dig deeper, so he let it rest, pretending it was just a beautiful gift. Yet in his heart he always suspected there was more. The waitress stood quietly, her chest tight, not sure how to respond. She saw in his eyes a mixture of love, guilt, and regret. Emotions so strong that they made him look less like a billionaire and more like a grieving man. A husband holding on to memories and at the same time haunted by the truth. She wanted to comfort him, but her own emotions kept her silent, both of them now connected by the weight of that necklace. The restaurant carried on as usual, customers chatting, children laughing, forks clinking. But at that table by the window, a storm was brewing. A storm made not of anger but of truth. The truth of a necklace that tied two lives together, one of great wealth and loss, the other of family history and longing. And though neither of them fully understood where this moment would lead, they both knew that life would not be the same after tonight, because sometimes, an object is not just an object. It is a key, unlocking doors to stories buried for decades. The billionaire sat frozen at the table. The soft clinking of cutlery around him seemed far away, like faint echoes in a dream. The waitress's words circled in his head again and again, each word sharper than the last, each sentence digging into the parts of his heart he had long kept locked. He stared at the painting of his wife, her gentle smile captured forever in color, and his chest tightened until it almost hurt. For years he had kept the necklace close, always thinking of it as a symbol of love. But now, hearing that it was once part of another family's history, the truth struck him with unbearable force. His hand trembled as he reached for his glass of water, but the glass shook so much he had to put it down. He covered his face for a moment, trying to breathe, but the memories rushed in. He remembered the day he bought the necklace. It was at a private auction, behind closed doors, no receipts that told its story, no questions allowed. He only saw the sparkle in his wife's eyes when she looked at it, and that sparkle made him forget everything else. He didn't care where it came from, didn't care who might have owned it before. He only cared that it brought joy to the woman he loved. But now that woman was gone, and the necklace had become a memory he carried like a treasure. Every time he looked at the portrait, every time he saw the delicate chain painted against her skin, he remembered her laughter, her warmth, the way she touched his cheek when she wore it. He thought it was pure love, yet tonight he learned it was also tied to someone else's pain, and the weight of that knowledge broke something deep inside him. The waitress stood silently, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. She had not expected her words to cut him so deeply. She had only wanted to understand, to ask, to confirm what her heart already knew. But now she saw a powerful man crumbling in front of her, not with anger, not with pride, but with sorrow. His eyes filled with tears that he tried to hold back, his lips pressed together, trembling, his chest rising and falling as if each breath was a battle. The other diners did not notice. They were too busy with their meals, too distracted by their own conversations. But at that corner table, the billionaire's world was falling apart. He finally lifted his head and met the waitress's eyes. His voice cracked as he spoke, low and heavy. He said he never knew. He never wanted to hurt anyone. He only wanted to make his wife happy. He confessed that he had wondered many times about the origin of the necklace, but he had been a coward, too afraid to ask questions that might bring answers he could not bear. His words tumbled out like broken pieces of a confession. He told her how his wife wore that necklace on their anniversaries, on quiet evenings when they sat together and watched the stars. He described how she would hold it gently between her fingers, saying it felt like a lucky charm, a gift that gave her strength. He admitted that after she passed away, he could not bring himself to lock it away. Instead he had this portrait painted with her wearing it. so he could keep both her and the necklace close forever, and now, realizing it belonged to someone else, he felt like he had betrayed her memory as well as another family's. The waitress listened with wide eyes, her heart aching for the man before her. She had come expecting indifference or even anger, but instead she found grief, raw and unhidden. He was not just a billionaire at that moment, he was a widower, a man who had loved deeply and now felt guilt just as deeply. She wanted to reach out, to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he didn't know, but the words caught in her throat. She could only watch as tears slipped down his face. The billionaire wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed to show weakness in public, but his voice betrayed him when he spoke again. He whispered that he wished he had asked more questions, wished he had been braver, wished he had found the truth while his wife was still alive. He said that now, every time he looked at the necklace, he would no longer see only her love, he would see the pain of the family who lost it, and that was a burden he did not know how to carry. His body shook slightly as he leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. The restaurant's warm light reflected off his damp cheeks, and for the first time in many years, he felt stripped of everything, of his power, of his fortune, of his pride. He was no longer the untouchable figure people saw in newspapers. He was only a man broken by love, guilt, and fate. The waitress finally found her voice, soft and careful. She told him she believed her grandmother would have forgiven him, that he was not the one who stole it, that sometimes life twists stories until they meet in strange ways. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that eased some of the pain in his heart. He nodded slowly, though the tears kept coming, because forgiveness from her lips sounded like forgiveness from her family, and maybe even from his wife. Still, the billionaire felt the wound cut deep. He confessed that the necklace no longer belonged to him. He said it never truly did, and though his wife had loved it, he could not deny the truth now that it was staring at him through the eyes of this waitress. He whispered that fate had brought her here, to this very table, to reveal the truth he had been hiding from for too long, and that realization was too powerful to ignore. The night outside grew darker, the city lights flickered through the window, yet inside that restaurant, one man's heart cracked wide open, and the young waitress stood at the center of it, holding in her hands a story that had been waiting to be told. The billionaire lowered his head once more, covering his face as silent sobs shook his body. He wept not only for his wife, not only for the family's lost necklace, but for himself. For all the years he had lived in the shadows of a truth he never dared to face, and in that moment, the billionaire, the man of unimaginable wealth, was reduced to nothing but a grieving soul finally forced to confront the past. The restaurant felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved closer, as if the air itself grew heavy with the weight of truth. The billionaire wiped his eyes, his voice still trembling from the confession he had just made, but now it was the waitress's turn. Her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She had held her grandmother's story inside her for years, never truly believing she would meet anyone connected to it, never imagining she would stand in front of a billionaire, pointing at a portrait of his late wife, speaking about a necklace that carried her family's broken history. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping her apron to stop them from shaking, and she began to speak. At first her words were quiet, almost hesitant, but soon the emotions inside her spilled out. She told him how her grandmother used to sit by the window on summer nights, her wrinkled hands folded on her lap, her voice soft but steady as she told the story of the necklace, how it had once been the pride of their family. A piece of jewelry that was not only beautiful but meaningful, handed down from one generation to the next, each owner keeping it safe as if it were a piece of their soul. The waitress's voice wavered as she explained that the necklace was more than gold and stone. It was a symbol. It was the one thing her grandmother said connected them to their ancestors, a reminder that even in hard times, their family carried love and dignity. The necklace was supposed to be passed down to her mother, and one day perhaps to her. But before that could happen, it disappeared, stolen in the chaos of a time when their family had nothing. Her grandmother never stopped grieving its loss, and she told the story so many times that it became etched in the minds of her children and grandchildren like a scar that would not heal. The billionaire listened, his face pale, his lips pressed together tightly, each word from the waitress cut deeper, because he could see now that the necklace his wife had adored had never truly belonged to him. It was a treasure ripped from another family's heart, and even though he had not been the thief, he had unknowingly kept what was never his to hold. Guilt pressed harder against his chest with every detail she revealed. The waitress's eyes shone with unshed tears as she went on. She told him how her grandmother described it. The way the chain glistened when sunlight touched it. The delicate design that could not be mistaken for anything else. The tiny carvings around the pendant that made it one of a kind. Her grandmother always said that whoever wore it carried not just jewelry, but history, love, and sacrifice. The waitress's voice broke when she said that seeing it again, even in a portrait, was like seeing a ghost from the past come alive before her eyes. The billionaire could no longer look at the portrait. He lowered his gaze to the table, but her words still painted the image in his mind. He remembered his wife wearing the necklace with pride, smiling as though it had always belonged to her. He remembered thinking it was fate that brought it to them. Yet now he realized it was fate that had finally revealed the truth, through this young woman standing in front of him, carrying her grandmother's pain like a torch passed down through time. The waitress continued, telling him how her grandmother would sometimes hold her hand and whisper that she hoped the necklace still existed somewhere, that maybe one day it would return to them. Though she said it softly, almost like a prayer, she never gave up hope. She told her granddaughter that things with love woven into them have a way of finding their way back home. Even if it takes years, even if it takes generations. And as the waitress spoke those words aloud, she felt tears roll down her cheeks because she knew her grandmother's prayer was coming true right now in the most unexpected way. The billionaire lifted his eyes then, his vision blurred with tears. He could hardly breathe under the weight of what he had heard. His chest ached with guilt but also with awe. He realized that what had seemed like a coincidence was far more than that. It was destiny, a story stretched across time. Finally circling back to this moment, he wanted to speak, to explain. But the words caught in his throat. All he could do was listen. Because this was not his story anymore. It was hers. It was her grandmother's. And he was only a man holding the fragments of it in his trembling hands. The waitress wiped her cheeks quickly, embarrassed to cry in front of him. But she couldn't stop. She told him how her grandmother's eyes always filled with sadness whenever she spoke of the necklace. How she would pause, swallow hard, and then smile faintly as if to hide her pain. How she kept telling the story because she wanted her children and grandchildren to remember what they had lost, to carry the memory forward even if the necklace never returned. The waitress's voice grew stronger. Then, filled with determination, as she said she had always promised herself that if she ever saw it again, she would not stay silent, she would speak, no matter how impossible it seemed. The billionaire leaned back, his breathing uneven, his hands clutching the edge of the table as though he might collapse without it. Every word from her lips felt like judgment and forgiveness all at once, and he could not stop the tears from falling freely down his cheeks. He whispered that her grandmother was right, that things filled with love do find their way back, even if the path is painful, even if it takes years. He admitted that the necklace had been both a blessing and a burden to him, but now he finally understood why. The waitress grew quiet then, her story told, her chest still trembling from the release of emotions she had carried for so long. The two of them sat in silence, bound together by history, bound together by a necklace that had carried love, loss, and now truth. The restaurant noise returned faintly around them. But in that moment it felt like the world had stopped. The billionaire lifted his gaze once more to the portrait, to the woman he loved, and whispered softly as if speaking to her, saying he was sorry, sorry for not asking, sorry for not knowing, sorry for holding on to something that was never truly theirs. And the waitress, standing there with tears in her eyes, felt her grandmother's spirit beside her, as if the old woman was finally at peace, watching as the truth surfaced after so many years. The young waitress realized that her voice had done what silence never could. It had awakened the past, and though the pain was heavy, there was also healing in it. The necklace had not only connected two lives that night, it had bridged two worlds, one of wealth and one of struggle, and now, both carried the same truth in their hearts. The billionaire could no longer hold himself together. The weight of the story, the necklace, and the portrait pressed down on him like a mountain. His chest rose and fell heavily, and his hands trembled as he tried to steady himself. But the emotions that he had hidden for years now broke free. His eyes filled with tears that spilled onto his cheeks, and for the first time in a long time, he did not try to stop them, he let them fall. He let himself weep in front of strangers, in front of the young waitress, in front of the memory of his wife. The waitress stood frozen, watching him, her heart aching for the man who had always been painted in newspapers as strong, untouchable, almost like stone. But here he was, fragile, human, and broken. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, his face hidden in his hands, his shoulders shaking as silent sobs racked his body. The other diners noticed nothing, too busy with their own lives, but at that table by the window, a storm of grief and truth poured out. He whispered into his palms, words broken by sobs. He said he felt like a thief. Even if he had never stolen the necklace with his own hands, he had carried it, cherished it, and allowed it to become part of his wife's identity. He said that every time he saw the necklace, he thought of love, but now he could only think of loss, of the pain it caused another family, of the history it carried that he had ignored. He admitted that he felt ashamed. Ashamed that he never asked where it came from. Ashamed that he never questioned the silence around it. The waitress's eyes softened, her own throat tight with emotion. She wanted to tell him it was not his fault, that he did not know. But the pain in his voice was so deep she understood that no words could erase it. He was not only crying for the necklace, he was crying for his wife too, crying for the memories they shared, crying for the love that time had taken from him. The necklace was only the trigger. The truth was that his grief had been buried under layers of wealth, work, and pride, and now it all came crashing down. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, his cheeks wet, and he stared again at the portrait. His wife's painted smile seemed different now, softer, heavier, as though even the image carried the weight of truth. He reached out a trembling hand toward the painting, his fingers stopping just short of the frame, and he whispered her name, a sound filled with longing, sorrow, and apology. He whispered that he was sorry, that he had failed to see what he should have seen, that he had held on to something beautiful but broken. The waitress took a step closer, her voice gentle. She told him her grandmother always said love was not in objects, not in gold, not in stones, but in the hearts of the people who gave them meaning. She said maybe his wife loved the necklace not because of where it came from, but because he gave it to her, because it was tied to his love, and that love was real. Her words were soft but steady, like a hand reaching out in the dark, and the billionaire listened, his tears still flowing, but his sobs quieting into heavy breaths. Still, the guilt did not leave him. He confessed that every time he thought of the necklace now, he would see the face of the grandmother who had lost it, the generations who had been left with only a story instead of the real thing. He said he felt as if fate had waited for this very moment to punish him, to remind him that nothing, not even wealth, could cover up the truth forever. His voice cracked as he admitted that he felt unworthy. Unworthy of his wife's love. Unworthy of the necklace. Unworthy of peace. The waitress shook her head quickly, tears brimming in her own eyes. She told him that sometimes fate does not punish. Sometimes it brings people together so that broken things can be mended. She said maybe the reason he never discovered the truth earlier was because the story was waiting for this exact night. For her to be here, for him to be here, for the necklace's history to finally be spoken aloud. Her voice grew firmer as she said that her grandmother's story and his wife's love had now met in the same place, and that was not punishment, that was destiny. The billionaire leaned back, his body heavy, his breathing uneven, but her words reached him. They sank into the cracks of his grief. He closed his eyes, letting the silence of the moment hold him, and then, almost without realizing, he spoke again. He said that for years he had pretended to be strong. He had walked into boardrooms, stood on stages, built companies, made deals worth billions, but none of it mattered now. None of it filled the emptiness his wife's absence left behind. And now, this truth about the necklace made that emptiness wider, deeper, almost unbearable. The waitress listened, her own chest tight with empathy. She realized that beneath the suit, the power, and the name, he was just a man who loved and lost. A man who carried guilt like any other human being, and she felt a strange connection to him. A bond formed not by money or class, but by shared pain. The necklace had tied them together, two strangers from two very different worlds, both holding the same sorrow in their hearts. The billionaire's hands dropped to his lap, his eyes swollen but calmer now. He said in a broken whisper that he wished his wife were alive to hear this story, to know the truth. Because she would have wanted to give the necklace back. She would have wanted to heal the wound instead of unknowingly carrying it. He said she had been kind, gentle, someone who believed in doing what was right, and he felt as though he had betrayed her memory by staying silent all these years. His voice shook again as he said he could not undo the past, but he could no longer pretend. He had to face the truth. He had to make it right. And though his tears still flowed, there was something different in them now, not just sorrow but determination. The determination of a man who had been broken open and now wanted to put the pieces back in their rightful place. The waitress nodded slowly, her own tears finally falling. She whispered that her grandmother would be grateful just to know the necklace still existed, that it had been cared for, that it had been loved. She said that even if it brought sadness, it also brought connection. It brought her to this table tonight. And that meant something. The billionaire looked at her with tired, tear-filled eyes, and for the first time since the truth was spoken, he felt a flicker of hope, a flicker of light, breaking through the heavy clouds inside his heart. The restaurant around them carried on as if nothing had changed, but for the billionaire and the waitress, everything had. He had broken down completely, yet in that breaking, something had shifted, something had opened the door to healing, and though the pain was sharp and the guilt heavy, he knew this was the first step toward redemption, toward honoring both his wife's memory and the story of the family who had lost the necklace. The night was far from over, but its course had already changed their lives forever. The billionaire sat quietly for a long time, his eyes still red, his breathing heavy, his mind filled with memories of his wife and the truth he had just learned. The necklace that had once been a gift of love now felt like a burden, a weight pressing down on him. He thought of how his wife used to hold it close, smiling as if it carried a piece of her soul, and his chest tightened at the thought that all along it had belonged to someone else's story, someone else's family, someone else's love. He could not keep it anymore. He knew that now. The necklace had to go back where it truly belonged. He turned to the waitress, his voice still shaky but steadier than before, and he said that he wanted to give the necklace back. He wanted her family to have it. He said his wife would have wanted that too, because she was a woman of kindness, a woman who believed in right and wrong. She would never have wanted to wear something that carried another family's pain. He admitted that he had kept it for himself after she died, not just because it was hers, but because he was afraid of letting go, afraid of losing the last piece of her he still held. But tonight, he realized that holding onto it this way was not love. It was selfishness, and it was time to set it free. The waitress's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. She felt her knees weaken as she gripped her notepad tighter. Was he really offering to return the necklace? The very thing her grandmother had spoken of all her life. The very thing her family had mourned for generations. Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head quickly, stammering that she couldn't accept it, that it was too much, that it wasn't her place. She said he had every right to keep it because it was tied to his wife's memory, and she didn't want to take that away from him. But the billionaire shook his head firmly, though tears still slid down his cheeks. His voice cracked as he said it wasn't about rights anymore. It was about truth. It was about doing what was right. He said his wife would live in his heart forever, with or without the necklace, but her grandmother deserved to hold what was stolen from her. He leaned forward slightly, his hands trembling, and he told the waitress that some things in life cannot be bought. Some things cannot be owned. They can only be cared for, and when the time comes, they must be returned to where they belong. The waitress pressed a hand against her mouth, her heart aching with emotion. She had never expected this night to turn into something so big, so heavy. She thought of her grandmother, her tired old eyes, her trembling hands, her soft voice telling the story again and again. She imagined walking into her grandmother's house with the necklace in her hands, imagined the look on her face, the tears, the joy, the healing, and the thought alone was enough to make her cry. Yet she hesitated, because she also saw the pain in the billionaire's eyes, the way his hands shook, the way his voice carried both grief and hope, and she did not want to hurt him further by taking it away. The billionaire saw her hesitation and gave her a sad smile, a smile that carried both pain and peace. He told her this was not about losing something, it was about giving. It was about honoring his wife by doing what she would have wanted. He said she had always told him that love was not about possession. It was about freedom, about kindness, about leaving the world better than you found it. And now he understood what she meant. The necklace was never his to keep. It was a gift meant for another family, and he wanted to honor both his wife and the young waitress's grandmother by returning it. The waitress wiped her tears quickly, her voice trembling as she whispered that it didn't feel real, that she never imagined such a moment could happen. She said her grandmother had always told her that one day, somehow, the necklace would find its way back, but she had laughed, thinking it was just a dream, and now here she was, standing in front of a billionaire, listening to him promise to return it. It felt like something out of a story, something too magical to belong in her simple life. The billionaire reached into his pocket then, pulling out a small velvet pouch he had carried with him for years. He placed it gently on the table, The pouch looked worn, its edges faded, but it still carried a quiet dignity. With trembling fingers, he opened it and let the necklace slide into his palm. The soft golden chain shimmered under the warm light, the pendant catching the glow as if it still carried life within it. The waitress gasped, her hand flying to her chest as her eyes filled with wonder. It was exactly as her grandmother had described, every detail perfect, every curve familiar. It was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a piece of her family's soul. The billionaire held it out to her, his hand unsteady, his voice soft. He told her that tonight, fate had spoken, and he could no longer deny it. The necklace was meant to go home, to return to the family who had lost it, to bring healing where there had once been pain. The waitress hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached out slowly, afraid to touch it, afraid the moment would vanish like a dream if she moved too quickly. But when her hand finally brushed against the chain, she felt a warmth, a strange comfort, as though her grandmother's spirit was reaching through time and holding her hand. She whispered that she didn't know what to say, didn't know how to thank him, but the billionaire shook his head once more, saying she didn't need to thank him. He was the one who owed thanks. Thanks to her for telling the truth. Thanks to her for being brave enough to speak. Thanks to her for helping him see what he should have seen years ago. He said this moment was not about wealth or power. It was about love, about honesty, about setting things right. And as the necklace passed from his hand to hers, both of them felt the air shift, as if something broken had begun to mend. The restaurant carried on around them, the chatter of voices, the clatter of plates, the hum of life. But at that table by the window, history was being rewritten. Two strangers, bound by fate, holding between them a necklace that carried centuries of love and loss. And in that moment, the billionaire felt lighter, his wife's memory felt brighter, and the waitress felt as though her grandmother's spirit was smiling. Finally at peace the night after the billionaire gave the necklace to the waitress felt unreal to both of them. She carried it carefully, her hands trembling as if she were holding something fragile like glass. Though it was made of gold and stone, it felt more delicate than anything she had ever touched. The billionaire watched her leave the restaurant with tears still in his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt as if his wife was smiling at him from somewhere beyond, proud of the choice he had made, proud that love and truth had been stronger than pride and fear. The next morning, the waitress stood outside her grandmother's small house, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She clutched the velvet pouch in her hands, her eyes stinging with tears before she even knocked on the door. The house was old, with paint peeling from the wooden walls, the garden overgrown. But it carried the warmth of memories, the smell of flowers, the sound of her grandmother's voice. She pushed the door open gently, and inside, the old woman sat in her chair by the window, knitting with tired hands, her eyes lifting slowly to meet her granddaughter's. The waitress stepped forward, her throat tight. She wanted to speak but the words wouldn't come. Instead she reached into the pouch and pulled out the necklace, the golden chain shimmering as the light from the window touched it, the pendant catching a glow that seemed almost magical. Her grandmother gasped, her hands freezing midair, her eyes wide as if she was seeing a ghost. The knitting fell from her lap, and for a long moment, she simply stared, unable to breathe, unable to believe what her eyes were telling her. Tears filled the old woman's eyes as she whispered the words she had repeated all her life. It came back, her voice trembled, thin but filled with power. Her wrinkled hands shook as her granddaughter placed the necklace gently into them. The old woman clutched it to her chest, sobbing softly, her whole body trembling. She had told the story so many times, had prayed so many nights, but she never truly believed this day would come, and now, here it was, her family's heirloom, the piece of their history, finally home. The waitress knelt beside her, hugging her tightly, crying with her, both of them overcome by the miracle that had unfolded. The grandmother kissed her forehead, whispering blessings through her tears, saying she was proud of her, saying fate had chosen her to be the one to bring it back. The young woman told her the story, about the billionaire, about the portrait, about his wife, about the tears he shed, about how he said the necklace no longer belonged to him. The grandmother listened with wide eyes, nodding slowly, understanding that this was not just luck, it was destiny. Meanwhile, the billionaire sat in his large but empty home, staring at the portrait of his wife that hung on the wall. He touched the frame lightly, his eyes red but calm. He whispered to her that he had done what was right, that he had given back what never belonged to them. He told her he hoped she understood. He told her he loved her still, always. But that love had guided him to this choice. He felt a strange peace settle into his chest. A peace he hadn't felt since the day she passed. As though the weight of the necklace had been lifted from his soul. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly in the small town. People whispered about the billionaire who came to a humble restaurant, about the waitress who spoke the truth, about the necklace that carried two families' history. Some called it a miracle, some called it fate, others simply called it the power of honesty. But for the billionaire and the waitress, it was more than a story, it was a turning point, a moment that proved love, truth, and courage could change lives. The grandmother wore the necklace once again, not for vanity, not for wealth, but for closure. She touched it gently every morning, tears filling her eyes, whispering thanks to the universe, to her granddaughter, and even to the billionaire who had chosen to let it go. She told her family the story once more, but this time, the ending was different, no longer filled with sorrow, no longer ending with loss. Now it ended with hope, with return, with healing. And as her children and grandchildren listened, they saw her face glow with joy they hadn't seen in years. The billionaire visited a week later, stepping out of his car with quiet humility, no cameras, no bodyguards, just him, carrying flowers in his hand. The waitress opened the door and welcomed him in. The grandmother sat waiting, the necklace around her neck, her hands folded over it protectively. When the billionaire entered, she stood slowly, her eyes wet with tears, and he bowed his head, humbled. He apologized again. Even though he was not the one who had stolen it, he apologized for carrying it, for not asking questions sooner, for letting it be part of his life while she was left only with memories. But the grandmother smiled through her tears, shaking her head. She told him he had nothing to be sorry for. She said he had honored her by returning it. She said his wife must have been a woman of great love if she wore it with joy, and that love had not been wrong. She told him that love is never wrong, it only changes shape. She thanked him with all her heart, and in that moment, both of them felt something mend, something heal between two lives that had never been meant to cross but had collided through fate. The billionaire left that small house lighter than he had felt in years, the sun shining down on him, his wife's memory warm in his heart. He knew he had lost the necklace but gained something greater. Peace, forgiveness, redemption. The waitress stood at the window watching him leave, feeling as though she had witnessed something sacred. She knew her life would never be the same again, because she had been part of something far bigger than herself. She had carried her grandmother's story into the world and brought it home again. The story closed not with bitterness, not with regret, but with healing. A billionaire who learned that wealth cannot erase history, a waitress who discovered the courage to speak, a grandmother whose hope was finally rewarded, and a necklace that had traveled through time, carrying sorrow, love, and truth, now resting once more where it belonged, shining not as a jewel of gold, but as a symbol of fate, of forgiveness, of love that refuses to be forgotten.